Hey there, everybody. Thanks for all the engagement. This video is focused on a question that Alex had brought up, basically about the stress, almost the depression that exists kind of in the business culture today. And one thing that I'd really just jump off of this, number one, is it's really the stress that millennials are feeling right now in their 20s and 30s, more so older 20s. And so here's the struggle. Number one is it's entry level. You're typically graduating with college debt that is excessively higher compared to the net take home of your income compared to your parents and especially your grandparents, right? So a lot of times your grandparents didn't graduate. They probably served in World War II or maybe even Vietnam, depending on your age. And so when they came back, there was a lot of opportunity for them to be able to get education paid for by the government. Or the other thing to recognize is that the tuition of school has gone up exponentially in comparison, where incomes have not gone up in the same rate. So last I had read, tuitions went up around 7 or 8% every single year for the last 25, 30 years. And you look at net income growth, and it really has just stayed up with inflation. And so what's happening is, as a student, that cost of debt, college student loans, is excessively higher because the incomes haven't kept up with that. So that's something that's new. Number one is that you're as you're getting into adulthood, you're actually taking on more debt than your parents and grandparents ever did when they graduated college. The other thing that you're running into from an employer perspective is that the entry level jobs just really aren't there. A lot of times the entry-level jobs, there's an expectation of some internship, some experience that's been going on that can translate you immediately into their business, and that way there's less of a training that's going to happen from starting here and going all the way up these gradual steps. They want to see your college education being beyond the classroom, and so it's going to be extremely important for you, if you're in college or even a technical college, to make sure that you're getting a job that can be applied to what you want to do when you graduate. So for example, if I'm a welder, I don't want to get a job as a bartender, even though it pays well. I want to focus on potentially getting a job at a local manufacturer where I'm going to be able to use some spot welding and be able to use that skill set instead of it being something that's completely unrelated with what's going on. The other thing that I would anticipate if I'm in college is maybe taking a year off to focus on just pure internship opportunities where I'm working at, let's say if I'm an engineer, I'm working at an engineering firm like a GE, and they know that I'm going to work in this internship program for 1 year, prove myself, and then I'm going to go back to school, finish my senior or junior year, and maybe next summer, it's my junior year, and then next summer I can come back again and do a little bit more internship and have some experience. And so where I'm going with that, number one, is if you look at the financial stress that's happening for a lot of these students when they get out of college, is that they have an excessively high amount of student loan debt, which is pressing down on them. It's pressing down sometimes on their parents as well. So that can create a lot of stress for that individual. The other thing that the millennial generation has a tendency to focus on is where their parents were at their age, right? Maybe they're married, maybe they're having kids, maybe they were further along in their career. But if you look at the college system, you have these general education requirements your freshman and sophomore year, and so it's actually pushing off your ability to graduate early, even though you might know exactly what you want to do. At the same time, again, I'm a firm believer that before going into college, a technical college, a university, find out exactly what you want to do first, and try to figure out then what's the quickest way you can get out of university or college and start working in that industry. Opportunities to shadow. I think the apprenticeship is way back in full force. It's back from, the 1800s. That's the way you got jobs back then, is that you shadowed somebody, you watched them, you did exactly what they told you to do. If let's say I was going to be a blacksmith, that means I'm getting like all the metal, I'm cleaning metal, I'm not doing anything that's actually important. I'm doing all the grunt work, but again, I'm watching, and eventually I'm going to start doing. And so needing to understand that if you're in college, you're going to have to kind of get coffee, so to speak. You're going to have to do some of the grunt work, making a lot of phone calls, doing a lot of financial analysis, you're doing some of the crummy job because that's what you're hired to do in order to learn it from the ground up, because that's your entry level internship, that's your entry level job. So you have the financial stress that's going to exist. You're going to have this pay that doesn't really feel like it's actually taking any money home. The other thing is, just from a familial perspective, you're not as advanced along as your parents were, your grandparents were, which may or may not be a good thing, just depending on the stress of having family that can create. The other thing that happens, I think, number three, when it comes to just the stress of working, is trying to find out what match passion and enjoyment with career. Because you might have looked at your grandparents and they did a job for 35, 40 years, they punched metal, right? They worked a lot of hours overtime in order to retire at 65, and they hated their job. They literally hated it. And you could see the stress in their face, and you could see the stress that they push onto the family. And so what you're trying to do then is, how can I find my passion? How can I find out what I'm really good at strength-wise, and have a career? The funny thing about it is, you still got to do something. So there's not going to be a lot of value of like going backpacking in Europe, although there is value in that. I think what you want to start doing is just saying, okay, I think I might like welding, so I'm going to go do that, and being okay with quitting that job after a year, realizing, you know what, I don't enjoy welding. I'd rather actually be in a surveying, right? And so now I'm outdoors, I'm doing something different, right? So by shifting and changing, that doesn't mean you're a quitter. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It means that you're trying to identify what's the best place for you. And so that's why I think a lot of stress is being added on to the younger generation as they're working, and just overall mental health. I think it's one of the very few unique situations right now. If you're in a more Western area, you're probably not overly concerned about where your next meal is. And if you are, then you're still focused on obviously that. But all of a sudden, once you get a job that's providing for your needs, and even if you don't have a lot left over, you're looking for satisfaction in life. And so it's interesting, because that really hasn't existed previous in human civilization prior to the 1900s, really, where you have this pursuit of happiness, you have this pursuit of satisfaction, where before it was a hunter and gatherer mode. Maybe you eventually got to a farmer, but you were more concerned about living and surviving against the ailments of weather and the ailments of just disease and illness. And you look at the life expectancies of people today versus what it was 100 years ago. You look at literally about 200 years ago, the population of the world was like 300 million. We're at like 7.3 billion. And so there's this huge population of people. There's a huge push of trying to find who you are that never really existed before. You were just trying to live. And so that pursuit of finding happiness has the exact opposite dissatisfaction of somewhat depression, maybe anxiety. And actually the point of that depression and anxiety, as long as it's not mental health, right? We're not talking about somebody that suffers from clinical depression or, bipolar mental health issues. We're talking about somebody that just struggles a little bit with being down and having kind of feel like they're in a rut and not getting out of it. What you're going to find though is the whole point of that anxiety, the whole point of that like being down, is to find happiness. Right? You wouldn't be propelled, you wouldn't be compelled to go find happiness if you didn't taste bitter. I know it sucks, but that's just how it is. I hope this is helpful, Alex. Have a fantastic day.